thou exalted, my servants and angels. Be thou exalted, with harp and with song. Saints in their anthems, of rapture adore thee. Thine be the glory forever. Amen. All right, how many of you remember this? Okay, all right, well, we're getting there though. We're getting this a tremendous song. On the second. Be thou exalted, Son of the highest, gracious Redeemer, our Savior and King. One of the Father, equal in glory, here with thy footstool, our homage we bring. Be thou exalted, my servants and angels. Be thou exalted, with harp and with song. Saints in their anthems, of rapture adore thee. Thine be the glory forever. Amen. Be thou exalted, O Spirit eternal, dwelling above thee, most holy within. Feed us each day with thy heavenly manna, either of wounded hearts, thy praises we sing. Be thou exalted, thy servants and angels. Be thou exalted, with harp and with song. Saints in their anthems, of rapture adore thee. Thine be the glory forever. Amen. Well, we will hit that again soon, just to try to learn it and get a little better with it. Go to 71, please. I think this one would be better known. I get a head shaking on that, and I know nobody doing this yet, so okay. A little better known. Since Jesus came into my heart. What a wonderful change in my life has been wrought since Jesus came into my heart. I have light in my soul for which long I have sought since Jesus came into my heart. Since Jesus came into my heart. Since Jesus came into my heart. Floods of joy on my soul like the sea billows roll. Since Jesus came into my heart. I have ceased from my wandering and going astray since Jesus came into my heart. And my sins, which were many, are all washed away since Jesus came into my heart. Since Jesus came into my heart. Since Jesus came into my heart. Let the joy of my soul like the sea billows roll. Since Jesus came into my heart. There's a light in the valley of death now for me. Since Jesus came into my heart. And the gates of the city beyond I can see. Since Jesus came into my heart. Since Jesus came into my heart. Since Jesus came into my heart. Like the joy of my soul, like the sea billows roll. Since Jesus came into Vera also asked me to remind you, and I will say this again during the service, December 5th, our Christmas fellowship after the service. Did you call that a potluck?
We call it a fellowship.
Okay. She calls it a fellowship.
You need to bring something.
But you
Is
need,
there a sign-up sheet or
no.
anything?
It'd be a true potluck then,
True potluck.
True potluck.
or fellowship, however, whatever. Anyway, moving right along. If I'm not mistaken, we were at the end of 27, and it says they went out into the fields and gathered the vineyards and trode the grapes and made merry and went unto the house of their God, did eat and drink and cursed Abimelech. See a little unity in with Gaal or Gael or Gaal or whatever, and the people. And I mentioned last week how he took part of every part of their lives. It even appears he took part of their worship. And in doing this, what they did was there was a unity that was formed. He was making himself one of him in every way. So there was a familiarity that he was breeding in there. So we go into verse 28, and it says, Gaal the son of Ebed, who is Abimelech, said, Who is Abimelech? Who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Is not he the son of Jerubbaal and Zabal his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. I think I maybe put the wrong emphasis in here. But he says, why should we serve him? There's a lot that's coming out, and it really, I could give it all in this verse, and then we could skip all the rest of the verses. But I'm going to try to break it up and give thoughts as I go along. Was Gaal truly against Abimelech? Well, I think he was. I think what we see here is probably some dislike or hatred, and I'm inclined to think hatred. With that said, and with all he's doing, was he the man to lead them to victory in a war? Was he the man to lead them to war? And I think that's pretty important for us to think about. I don't know that we do. We do a lot of times. Why do you come here to church? You know, what is the reason you go to any church you go to? Are you looking for me to lead you? Or what are you looking for? When you pick a person out and you look at them and you think, man, I kind of like him. What makes your mind go that way? What is it that really draws you to them and appeals to your senses? I think we need to be careful in that. I use my illustration. I hope and pray that everybody comes here to worship God. That's what I hope and pray you do. But boy, I'm a wade into the deep end of the pool to start off with this morning. But as the one that's standing here, I am to lead you into that worship. So if you choose the wrong person, now let me just stop for a second. I'm not going anywhere. Okay, God hasn't led me to leave here, unless you throw me out the door. God has not led me to do that. But He has led me to preach and teach the Word of God and prepare you. Remember, we've been talking a lot about preparing. How many of you know the day you're going to die? How many of you know the day I'm going to die? Okay, that's good. When?
The day God calls me home.
Yeah, well, praise the Lord. But you understand what I'm saying. I don't know the day, the moment, the hour that God might call me out of here. And while I am here to lead and to guide and to teach. One of those things I teach about is leadership. How to choose. We've talked a lot about that. Back and forth, we have talked some since I've been here, but God has given us passages of Scripture lately that seems to have come up more, and He's taken my mind toward that a lot more. And again, in this is what we're looking at as leadership. We're looking at somebody leading somebody somewhere and whether they're worthy to follow. In a church situation such as this, it is, boy, I'm going to step on my own toes in this a little bit because this is true and it isn't true in all situations. But in this situation especially, you need to know the character of the man. You need to know he's a man of God. You need to know he's a man of the Word. You need to understand and know that he is faithful to the Word of God. Now, while I say that in this situation as a church, in my opinion, that's true to anybody I follow, whether it be in a company or whatever they're selling, whatever they're doing. But that's not always what we look at. As a matter of fact, we don't always have the freedom to look at that. Sometimes Christians are not running businesses. We're not able to work for them. And so with that said, while it is important, it's not something that we can always do. But was Gaul, the son of Ebed, was he the man to lead them to victory in war? Was he even the man to lead them in war? Yeah, if we've looked on down, we understand he probably wasn't. And from what we've seen so far, to be honest, I don't place a whole lot of faith in him. What does anybody have an opinion of him so far?
He's not saying not to follow for righteous reasons. It's more like it's a hate. Well, that's, like if he was leading in a godly way and saying this guy's leading us down the wrong path and we need to get on track with God, then you'd say, yeah, he's a good leader. He's the one we should be following. But his is more he just hates the other guy. Yeah. So.
And really at this point, I don't know how much of the hate we see coming out, but what we do see is we see a lot of mouth. We see a lot of talking. They did eat and drink and cursed Abimelech. There's nothing positive about that. We're not told why he's cursed, but remember I called your attention. I said, is he one of these that was one of these highwaymen, if you talk about? Was he one of those setting in liars in wait or whatever? I don't know. My determination is a lot like yours. I believe he's a lot of mouth. I believe there is some problems with his heart. But I want to focus on the mouth for a minute. From my experience, mouth is just mouth. I'll say this probably several times before we get out of these few verses here, but I was told real young in life, and I don't even remember the situation, and it wasn't my father, says an empty wagon makes a lot of noise. You ever heard that? You never heard that. Empty wagon makes a lot of noise. Well, why does an empty wagon make a lot of noise? Because as it's going down the road, it's hitting all these bumps, it's able to rattle. But if you put a load in that and you pull it down the road, what do you hear? But it's not making a lot of noise. It's grunting and grinding under the burden it's bearing. And so they tell you that to tell you there's nothing inside. If they're rattling their mouth and making a lot of noise, a lot of time it's just noise. It may rattle and bang all over the road, but it doesn't bring about any real change. The truth is, when you carry a lot of burdens, you really don't have the time or the luxury to make a lot of accusations and make a lot of empty noise. You have to be, and I like what Christ said, I have to be about my Father's business. You have business to attend to. You don't have time for all this. So he seems to have a lot of time. And when you look at this verse, who is Abimelech? Who is Shechem? It seems like he's asking a lot of questions. Why is he asking these questions? Well, you're right, but what is the point in that comparison? He's undermining the authority. He's making these people draw a comparison. Who is Abimelech at this point? Who is he? Somebody tell me. He's the king. He's their ruler. He's the one in power with the authority. Who is Shechem?
He's one of the people.
Where are these people from? There's two ways you can take this. You can say who is Abimelech and who are the people that's behind him, or they could say who is Abimelech and who are we? Exactly who we are. So it depends on how you want to look at it and how you want to take it. But it is a comparison. It is undermining. And then he says that we should serve him. Is he not the son of Jerubbaal? Seems to me they're trying to divide him. There's a division. Take this and compare it to how Abimelech stirred the people. How did he do it? Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. He really didn't. There was a division there. In other words, who is Jerubbaal? But it was more so they campaigned on the unity. Hey, I'm for you and you're for me. We had back home. She started laughing because I caught it the minute I said it. There was he was a common man. He wasn't anything special. No, it didn't appear to be. But he run for office, and his slogan was, "I'll be for you if you'll be for me on election day." He ended up being a pretty good, I would say overall, as a politician goes, he was a pretty good politician. He was for the people, generally in just about everything. But he was, that was years gone by. But when I read this here, I think, yeah, that's the political thing. If you be for me, I'll be for you, How often does that come about is true. Matter of fact, somebody drew this comparison not too long ago. They said most politicians run on the same promises. They never, ever do what they say, because if they do, they won't have anything to run on next time around. Or at least that's their philosophy. Sometimes I wonder if that's not right. But anyway, I'm talking too much. What we see here is he makes some mistakes. He said, who is Abimelech, who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal? And then he puts this in. And Zebul, his officer. He adds that in. It's one thing to pick out a person who's in authority and pick at him, but how about one of those that's in the same group of people you're dealing with? So I think he's allowed his mouth to overload him. He's allowed his tongue to put him in a position he can't handle at this point. We call that painting yourself into a corner. When you look at what he said about Abimelech, that fits in. The people are disgruntled. But what he said about Zebul may or may not. Who is Zebul? Well, you have to go down and you find out that he is the ruler of that city, probably what we would consider a mayor. So, of course, he would have friends, in that city. So he's getting into questionable territory. I think, in my opinion, I would say he's walking on dangerous ground. He's getting risky in what he says. You never know the loyalties of people when you start in a context like this. I think he really was a big error. But anyway, I think this to me reveals some dangers. I really personally, if I were to say about a campaign, I like somebody running on the campaign of unity. I'm for you. We're the same. I don't like the divisive nature. If you start off divisive, where's the chance you're ever going to bring unity? He's already sowing a major seed of discord. So I was getting back to, maybe I'll let that drop right now. We'll stop with that one. Anyway, when I look at this, I try to think about the type of person, the nature of the person that's doing this. This person at this point, Gaal, what do we know of him? Only know that he was the son of Ebed. That's the only thing I have. That he come from somewhere else. He come in here, he wasn't known. He had really no authority, no background. He had his brethren around, which may give you a false sense of security, may give you a false sense of authority. But he comes into these people and he begins to openly sow discord. He's sowing dissidence. I look at these people as divisive. In this case, I see insurrection. Who is he to question the authority of the king? Let's apply it to us. Who are we to question the authority of the government? Nobody's saying anything.
Only if it goes against what God says.
I agree.
And the government's supposed to be working for us, so we should be able to.
I agree.
question them.
But there are some comparisons here. If you have a disagreement with somebody, where do you take that disagreement?
To that person.
What does the Bible tell us?
To that person.
So what is he doing? He's undermining. He's sowing discord. It's insurrection because he's going against the authority. Do not we have to be careful that we don't do that as well? Because if we're sowing discord, if we're sowing insurrection, I don't care if it's against the government or not, are we right with God? There is a lesson here for us. We may, you may totally agree with this, man. I think that Abimelech needs to get out of office. How many would agree with that? I agree. I think he needs to, I don't think he needs to be king. He's a wicked man. But it is the proper way of doing it. There's so much in here for us to be taught by. Yes, ma'am.
And sometimes when you depose one wicked person, you end up with even more wickedness.
Boy, you beat me to that. That was probably 2 verses down the road, but you beat me to that. I think God is trying to open our eyes to types of people. You need to be careful when you meet people of this mannerism. Have you ever run into somebody and the minute you run into them, they just begin talking a lot of negative things? I not too long ago, I run into people and the first thing they wanted to do was cut the feet out from under somebody else. And I'm like, in my position, it's not uncommon for people to tell me about other pastors and, of course, what we should do to them. I'm not getting involved in that. That is not the way to go. Let me give you my philosophy if you don't know how I see that. I believe that what I do, I'm answerable to God. I believe that pastor is between him and God. That church and those people between them and God. I may not agree, but it's not my place to correct. So I stay away from that. My advice would be, pray about it, make sure you're in the going direction God wants you to go, and then go. There's no sense in, they have a ministry. Why destroy their ministry? You don't know what God is doing in their life, See, I like what David did. I'll not touch the Lord's anointed. How do you know whether he put himself or God put him there? Just my thoughts real quick on that. So I think you need to be aware of the types, this type and the mannerism of this person. It's really very destructive. I've never met a group, a couple, an individual. I've never met people that have been around this type of characteristic or had this type of mannerism that had peace, that were able to keep friends, because it's so destructive. So you really have to be careful. This is probably one of my biggest challenges. I'm an analytical person. I analyze everything to death. I think through things, well, not everything, but most things. When I go into something, I study it out and I try to know what I'm talking about. My IQ level is called a curator. Facts. I just get a lot of facts. What's the opposite side of that? If you're analytical,
blindly and doesn't do their homework beforehand, dives in with.
well, if you're an analytical personality, and you don't be careful, you'll become critical. That is the other side of that. Your greatest asset will always be your greatest problem.
That's
Okay.
everything in life, every character we have.
But if you have something, if you're a tremendous giver, eventually that's going to cause you problems. You have to understand how to give, when to give, what God says about giving. It always works out that way. So that's my balance. I have to understand that if I go too far in that, then I get critical. And I don't want to be critical. So it's easy to get drawn down. But you have to be careful of the character. This person here, I would say he probably is speaking without thinking. He's just going along. Oh, these people are laughing. Let's keep it going. Oh, yeah. Oops. Shouldn't have said that. Got myself in trouble, He's sowing seeds. The damage is done. The division has already started taking root the moment he said that. Just a side note, we'll move on. This kind of talk and this kind of behavior can destroy a church. It can destroy an individual. This is one of the reasons God commands us to guard our minds. This is the reason he teaches us about the tongue being able to do so much damage. He wants you to guard yourself, not to fall into these things, to guard yourself from the evil that these things can cause in lives and the troubles you'll reap from it. Anyway, so he's making his pleas and boast for the people, and really it's kind of interesting. Look at what it says here. He says, well, wrong verse. Let me go to the other one. Go to verse 29. And would to God his people were under my hand. Then I would remove Abimelech. And he said to Abimelech, increase thine army and come out. He was not as subtle as Abimelech, was he? He starts off with in 29, and would to God this people were under my hand. I wish I had the authority. I wish I had the rule. If these people were under me, this is what we would do. Abimelech said, well, if you're flesh of my flesh and bone of my bones, we're alike. This person is already talking insurrection. He's already talking about overthrow. He's seeking the rule. He wants the authority. He wants to come, let me rephrase that. He has come to the same people Abimelech has come to, basically with the same argument. Little differences, not as subtle. He's not as clever, I don't think. He's kind of bold. I kind of wonder, what's in his mind? What does he think? Does he think that because he's gotten a few people, a few of his brethren to follow him, that now he's lifted up? Would you classify him as a vain person? Prideful? Would you classify Abimelech as that? So there's some similarities in character. There's some differences too. I find what he said here, I'm not that type of person to say what he said as far as, and would to God this people were under my hand. It's such an open display of his desire to have the power to rule these people. When he says that, immediately I compare the two, and I'm thinking, I think I like Abimelech better. Not saying that's the right choice, but I think he's going to be a worse leader. I think this person here is, because of his brashness, because he's not subtle.
He didn't kill his family first, though.
Well, not that we know of. No, he's not a murderer, so to speak, as far as actually doing the action. But isn't that what he's talking about? How are you going to remove Abimelech? How many lives is it going to cost to remove Abimelech? You're talking insurrection. You're talking war. You're talking a battle at least. And he's doing this. It looks to me like he's not really worried about costing anybody's life. My mind goes back to this. Is he really sincere with what he's saying? Does he really believe what he's saying? I'll tell you why I asked that question. The last part of 29 says this. And he said to Abimelech, increase thine army and come out. Do you think he said that to Abimelech?
Not directly, probably said to the people to look out.
That's exactly what I think. And the following verses kind of reveal that, because you see that Zebul, he communicates that in 31 to Abimelech. So I'm thinking, so he's kind of boasting, he's kind of proudful, he's saying these things, he's building himself up, but is he sincere? Here's what I picture. I picture this fella coming in, and I see him with his brethren. They probably, around his brethren, he can probably say anything, they know his character. It's not a problem. It probably goes nowhere. So he gets in this city, and they're making merry. So I imagine there's some drinking going on. They trod grapes. I don't know. But I see his tongue getting loose just with the fellowship and the excitement and saying things, and these people are responding positively, and so that encourages his heart. He continues to say these things, and his mouth. He's got a mouth. And he says too much. He overloads himself. But he didn't think of something. He didn't think of this Zebul and his loyalty to Abimelech. And so now what he may have said in jest, may have said just to encourage the people, carries on outside the walls. How many of you have ever said something and you go, listen, I'm going to tell you this, but don't repeat it? So I'm not the only one. How many of you have said that and then it had to come back to you? I was on the phone with a man one day talking, and I made mention of something that I had heard. And he goes, "Where'd you hear that from?" So immediately red flags go off. I said, "Well, from a friend." He said, "Well, you don't have to tell me. I only told one person, and they weren't supposed to repeat it." I was not told not to repeat it. It was a prayer request, but it was a personal prayer request. I'm like, you know what I learned real quick? I learned the wisdom in keeping a confidence. If you don't keep a confidence, it's going to come back and haunt you. A pastor once told me, he said, "I got a huge church now," he said, "and when somebody comes up to me and says, 'Hey, listen, I got something to say, but I don't want you to repeat it,' he goes, 'Nope, I don't want to hear it. You keep it to yourself.'" And that's wisdom. And I tell people, they said, "I want to tell you a secret." This is my line. A secret is not a secret once you tell somebody. You no longer have control over what you just said. As long as you keep it here, you have total control. The moment you give it out, you go from total to none. You say, "Well, I can control." No, you can't. The moment you give it out, it's no longer a secret. This man made a big mistake. He didn't understand that principle. Once that went out, he couldn't control where it went. It may have been just a jest to make himself look good, but now he's in trouble. Because this thing's going to travel right on up the line. We're going to see it's going to go right on. I don't think that it was his intention for it to go any further. You know, maybe it was, but he was a liar. And I'm thinking, now this is an assumption on my part. I think he was a liar in wait. I think what he did not do openly. And he got prideful. He got overwhelmed in his ability to accomplish or the success he had. And he said some things he shouldn't say. Proverbs 10:18 says, "He that uttereth the slander is a fool." There are several other verses on this, and this was Gaul's mistake. He began to slander, he began to brag, and that's his downfall. He failed to understand that even though there may be a group of people and they all may be shaking their head yes, there's one in there that this yes actually means no. And you're going to get they'll agree because everybody else is agreeing. They'll nod because everybody else is nodding. But when they leave there, that's what happened to him, was it not? They were all in agreement. Yeah, we're for Abimelech. And then down the road, their hearts convicted them. This is the nature of people. When I say a lot about, he said to Abimelech, "Increase the army and come out." The reason I say what I do is because there's no revealed messenger sent. It's all in the following verses that we find out what's going on. So in verse 30 it says, when Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of God. So now we see who was who was the ruler of the city. We find out what Zebul was. We knew he was an officer before in 28, but now we find out what type of officer. We also find out that what he said angered him. And then in 31, we find out that he was loyal to Abimelech. When I say loyal, maybe I'm a little wrong. Maybe he wasn't totally loyal. Maybe it was the lesser of two evils. Why do I say that?
Maybe he knew Gal and knew that he was worse, and he already knew what Abimelech was capable of, and was willing to take his chance on sticking with Abimelech than Gal.
I think basically, in essence, you're right. He knew that he was an officer under Abimelech. He was a ruler of a city. Gaul had just said, "Who is he?" He already knew where his heart was toward him. So I think if you learn anything in this, you're learning that people listen to what you're saying, and they can determine, they make some assessments by this. I think Zebul in his own right was wise. Matter of fact, as we go on, I think you're going to see a lot of wisdom and abilities on his part. He had to have had something. He was over the city. He had to have some authority. Some ability to do. Let's go back to Gaul for a second. I think he was not a very wise person. I think he went into a city and stirred some people up. This was the hometown, if you would, of Abimelech. A lot of his relatives were in there. Relatives that would have known the in and outs when Abimelech was campaigning. What did Gaul know? Pretty much blind. He went in there without knowing anything. And so he reminds me of a bull in a china shop. He just goes back trashing around and finally he messes up. He destroyed his chances, I think, to ever really accomplish anything among the people because he'd already drove a wedge in there. With Gaul's words, he understood that any favoritism that he was enjoying under Abimelech, he would not enjoy under Gaul. So for him, this was a no-brainer. I mean, why do I want to help Gaul when I've already got it this good? I rule this city, you know. I got the king's favor. I'm in his stead. So I don't have any issue with saying that Gaul was a foolish person, but I want to get into 31. Let's go to 31 real quick. It says, and he sent messengers, talking about Zebul, sent messengers unto Abimelech privily, saying, behold, Gaul the son of Ebed and his brethren come to Shechem, and behold, they fortify the city against thee. There's two things that jump out to me immediately in this verse. The first one is privily. Nobody knew he was sending the messages. It was a silent treatment. He didn't let anybody know what was going on. Why would he do that? You ever heard of playing two hands against the middle? Pretty smart. There's also something else in my mind. It seems to me because of what I said before, his anger against Nabal, Gaul, and understanding that it looks to be a favoritism. He's over the city at this point, and he wouldn't be under Gaul. It seems to me that he was almost like a spy in this city. Now, let's stop here because that's an accusation I can't prove. But let's go back to character traits. He sent the letter privily. He sent it to Abimelech about Gaul. Why did he send it? Well, we understand he was not favored by Gaul, but he was favored by Abimelech. Now let's look at Abimelech's character for a minute. What kind of character did I tell you I believe that Abimelech had? He was a vain person. He was an empty person, but he was also a very prideful person. Those people cannot stand somebody to talk about them. They need to know that they want to look the best they can in everybody's eyes. So you start sowing discord, they go, root it out. What better person to root it out than somebody that looks like one of the own? So Zebul would have been a perfect. He's got a favor. He's in a position of authority. If anything happens in that city, he can say, hey, listen, Abimelech, we've got some problems down here. I need you to come down. Which is really what he did in 31. Now look at the end of 31. He says this, behold, they fortify the city against thee. Is there anything that tells us this is true? That's what gets me. There's no mark of a fortification. There is a mark or an understanding that there's some partying going on, some feasting, if you would. They're having a good time. They're bonding. But where's the fortification? I don't see that. So this is where I see the two sides getting played against each other. He's in the middle. He's hearing all this. He's passing it on, but he's also passing on a little incitement. Hey, listen, if you don't get down here and take care of this. So he's not allowing this to build, but he's lying to get a response. That's what it looks like to me. Could I be wrong? Sure. But it is interesting how it's all unfolding. It's also interesting as we go on how he instructs, if you would, Abimelech, how to come down, what to do, and all these other things. So we're going to leave it at that. Like I said, this last part, pretty much in my opinion, and I'm telling you, this is how I think they thought, this is what I see in the characters. But we'll leave it at that. You draw your own opinions. What we do know is that Gaal has a big mouth. Zubal wrote to Abimelech, and Abimelech's not going to sit still. He's going to come on and he's going to do something about it. All right, we're done. We'll come back on the hour.